We're brought here today by the love that Sarah and Davis have for each other.
I can't believe I get to marry him. We're perfectly compatible in every way.
Yeah, she just gets me, man.
Someone to talk to all night long.
Someone to talk to all night long.
Early morning jogs.
Sleeping in late.
We'll spend the holidays with my parents.
We'll spend the holidays with my parents.
We'll have one well-behaved daughter.
We'll have 4 or 5 little dudes running around.
He'll help me pay off my debt.
I should probably tell her about all my debt. Is that important? We'll share a bank account.
Obviously, we're gonna share a Facebook account.
Do I need to friend my in-laws?
Someone to do my laundry.
Someone to do my laundry.
Double income.
Stay-at-home dad.
Meal planning, of course.
Take out.
The city.
The burbs.
Mission trip.
Ski trip.
Blue.
Red.
Cat.
Dog.
Fries.
Rings.
Potato.
Potato.
Minivan.
Motorcycle.
2 words. Finished basement.
2 words. Man cave.
He's so smart.
Do you think that birds wish that they had hands?
We're going to be so happy.
We'll be so happy. I'm gonna crush it at being a husband.
We live in a country where it is widely accepted and believed that there should be a separation and a distinction between the church and what the church does and the state and what the state does. And I think this is a great approach to civil matters in general because history is littered with examples of how everybody loses when the state tries to impose its authority in the church. And it's littered with bad examples of how everyone loses when the church tries to impose its authority into state matters. So I'm glad we have this system in America where, hey, we're 2 distinct entities with 2 unique interests. But there is one area in our country where the federal government has decided we think it's a good idea for the church to have authority in legal matters. And that has to do with weddings. As an ordained minister, I have the legal authority to take 2 individuals and with a few words change their legal status as I make them become husband and wife, which means when I go to a wedding, I get the best seat in the house. See, when you go to a wedding, if you're lucky, you can see the backs of everyone's heads, and that's just if you're in the first few rows. If you're in the back, forget about it. You don't get to see a thing. But when I go to a wedding, it's like everyone got dressed up just for me. They're like, hey, Jason, we're just going to line up in a row here just so you can see how good we all look. Hey, thanks, everyone. I mean, I am so close to the action. I can see the groom's heart beating beneath his shirt. I can see the tears on the bride's cheeks. I can smell the alcohol on the best man's breath. I am right there where everything is going on with the wedding. I am that close to it. I can almost hear that inner monologue we just watched on the video as they are getting ready to make their vows to one another. So when couples come to me and they say, hey, Jason, will you preside at our wedding? Will you be part of the wedding day? I say, well, let's see if that works out because I can't unfortunately do every wedding that I'm invited to be part of, but I'll do what I can to help people out. And I say, before I can say yes, there are some prerequisites I need you to fulfill. And in fact, I make it difficult for people to get married, to be honest, because that's kind of peripheral to what I do. As Hope's pastor, we're really building this church for people who gave up on church. And if that's you, if you say, I haven't found church helpful in the past, hey, we're so glad you're here because this is what we do. We're trying to help people reconnect with God. So weddings are kind of peripheral to what I do, but I like helping couples out. But I make it hard to get married. So I say the first thing you have to do is you have to come to a 2-month-long pre-marriage class that I teach. And by the way, I only teach 1 a year. I see some couples in the room nodding their heads. They're like, yeah, we did that. I only do 1 a year. And the next one, just so you know, FYI, starts Saturday, March 3rd. The first Saturday of March is when it begins. And if you are planning on getting married at any time in the next 12 months, and if you are considering asking me to be part of it, do not miss the train. It is going to leave the station, and if you miss that prerequisite, I don't do your wedding. It's really as simple as that. So you can get more information at guest services if you're interested in learning about that. And then in this class, there are about 25 hours of homework I make couples complete. And if the relationship survives all of that, then they have to go to 2 private meetings with me before the wedding. And then there's a 6-month and a 12-month anniversary follow-up after the honeymoon is over. And people say, Jason, why do you make it so complicated for couples to get married? The reason why I make it complicated to get married is because marriage is complicated. Yeah, you see what I did there? Yeah, I make it complicated because marriage is complicated. Yet there's this prevailing myth in our society that the secret to being happily married is to find the right person. Find your soulmate. Because if you truly find the right person, all of your baggage will magically disappear and you're going to live happily ever after. This is the Cinderella myth. Think about the Cinderella story for a minute, would you? You've got this girl who grows up in an abusive home. She has an evil stepmother and stepsisters, an absent father, yet she wants to fall in love with this narcissistic man, so she gets dressed up like someone she isn't so that he can't even recognize her. She puts on some clear heels, which apparently attracts him to this kind of girl. They fall in love on the spot, but he's about to see who she really is without being all fake, so she has to run away, and then he can't find her, so he takes this slipper, and because he has nothing but spare time on his hands, he goes to every girl in the country, and apparently, literally every woman wants this man, so they are all trying on this slipper, and apparently she wears about a size 5 toddler shoe because it doesn't fit anyone, but then when it finally fits her, he can't recognize this woman he loves so much. He just has to see if the shoe fits. And when the shoe fits, they fall in love and live happily ever after and move to the suburbs and have 2 children, and she gets an SUV or maybe a Prius, depending on your environmental perspective. But why isn't there a Cinderella, the sequel? Because in Cinderella, the sequel, it would start with Cinderella in therapy for her absent father, her abusive stepmother who raised her in an attic. I mean, no wonder this girl talks to animals, trying to make a relationship work out with a self-centered prince who's been spoiled his entire life. And we look at the Cinderella story and say, well, of course they're going to live happily ever after. They love each other. But our experience shows us that that's not how life actually works. Marriage is complicated. So I make it a little bit complicated to get married. So for the relationships that do survive the class portion of my pre-marriage regimen, and I get to meet with them, I say, all right, here's the deal. Just so you know, I want to be clear up front, and I don't want to mislead you. And I meet with the couple, and I tell them this. I look them right in the eye and say, just so you know on the front end, I don't care about your wedding. And they look at me and kind of laugh nervously like it's the beginning of a joke. And I say, no, really, I don't. And the reason why I don't care about your wedding is because your wedding really isn't that important. What's important is the day after your wedding. What's important is the year after your wedding. What's important are the decades after your wedding. And what I'm interested in is the marriage. I'm not interested in the wedding. I'm interested in the marriage. And I want to work with you to make a great marriage. Now, don't get me wrong. I hope it's a wonderful day. I'm sure it will be because, Lord knows when you get married, it takes an incredible amount of time and energy and resources and money and orchestration and planning. Listen, I hope it's a beautiful day. I hope it's 72 degrees and sunny and the birds are out. I'm sure it'll be fine. But I want to help you with the marriage. So after we go through this whole class and all these meetings, it's finally time for me to plan with the couple. All right, what do you want your wedding to be like? It's your wedding. I don't care. How do you want it to go? What do you want it to be like? Are there any main ideas or themes you want me to talk about in your wedding? Now, here's where it gets interesting. Over the years, I noticed that every single couple, doesn't matter if it's a first marriage or second marriage, doesn't matter how long they've been dating, doesn't matter if they're younger or older, every single couple always answers with one of 3 themes they want for their marriage. And at first, I didn't notice, okay, they want me to talk about this idea, they want me to talk about that idea, they want me to talk about that idea. But as time went on, I noticed there are only 3 themes that couples want me to talk about at their marriage. And in the pre-marriage class, we talk about all kinds of themes, all kinds of important ideas for having a great marriage together. But these 3 ideas kept coming to the surface over and over and over again, which made it easy for me. It meant I only had to write 3 wedding sermons. So that's the easy part. But I noticed this is a fascinating trend. So I started asking couples, why do you want me to talk about this idea? Why do you want me to talk about that theme? And they said, Jason, it's real simple. We were having an argument, an ongoing argument in our relationship, and when we bumped into this one idea, we were able to end the argument. We've been having this ongoing struggle in the relationship, and when we bumped into this one idea, it resolved the struggle. We've been having this ongoing problem in our relationship, and when we bumped into this idea, it resolved the problem. This one idea gave us new clarity about us. It gave us new clarity about our relationship. It gave us new clarity about God's plan and purpose for our relationship together. Jason, when we bumped into this one idea, it changed everything. So we would like you to talk about this idea at our wedding. I'm like, all right, that's a pretty good answer. I'll talk about that idea at your wedding. So over time, I started calling these three ideas the love handles, because they're simple ideas, they're simple ways to get a grip on your romantic relationship. Three simple yet profound ideas that, if taken and if practiced and if implemented into your marriage, you're going to get a better grip on your relationship. Now, the only difference is, in a wedding, I don't get a lot of canvas to paint on, if you know what I mean. It's not like, couples are kind of nervous, like, so you're going to do like a 40-minute sermon? No, I'll cut it down to 35 for your wedding. I mean, in fact, I don't know if you've ever been to a wedding. After a wedding, I don't know if you've ever heard someone say this: I wish that wedding ceremony had been longer. Said no one ever, okay? Cold drinks? No, we want to sit out here in the 90-degree July sun a little longer. Why would we want the ceremony done so we could get cold drinks? This is great right here, okay? It's a wedding ceremony isn't really the place. You just kind of get in there, stick the dismount, and get everyone off to the reception. That's how the wedding goes. But what I'm doing in this series is I'm going to take these three love handles, and I'm going to tease them out a little bit. We're going to explore them a little bit. We're going to go to more depth than I normally get to when I'm doing a wedding. But if I've ever done a wedding that you've been at, or maybe I presided at your wedding, at some point in this series, you are going to hear a theme, and it is going to take you back to that moment in time. Because, again, these are the three things that couples always ask for. So today is going to be introductory. It's going to set us up for the love handles, and then in the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about each of these love handles. Now, last disclaimer before I jump in. You're like, we haven't jumped in yet? No, we're about to. It's not a wedding. There's no reception to get to when we're done. Cool your jets. This very specifically, just so you know on the front end, is about marriage, which means this doesn't apply to everyone in the room equally, and I understand that. But what you will notice as I talk about these love handles is that the principles behind them apply to all of your relationships. You will be able to take the principles we discuss, and you will be able to apply them in your family dynamics. You will be able to apply them at work. You will be able to apply them with your friends. My applications that I will be making are going to be specifically marriage applications, but you're smart people. You'll see very quickly how they really apply to all of our relationships and how to have healthy relationships in every area of life. But I'm going to be talking specifically about marriage. So to get going, I thought, what is it that all couples have in common? Because there's a lot of diversity in the room, and all of our relationships are in different places. So what do all couples have in common? Here's the first thing that all couples have in common. All couples have hopes and dreams for their marriage. This is especially true when you're dating and when you're engaged, but all couples have hopes and dreams for their marriage. They have hopes and dreams about where they'll live and how many children they'll have and when those children will come and how their career paths will go and what they'll be able to drive and how they'll be able to vacation and what they'll be able to wear and who's going to do the dishes and who's going to do the laundry and how we're going to spend our evenings and what intimacy is going to look like. Every single couple, and there's nothing wrong with that. You've never been married before, or if you have been married before, it makes you just more finely attuned to what your hopes and dreams are for your next relationship. All couples have hopes and dreams for marriage. That's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. It's the way it is. Second thing we have in common is this. All of your hopes and dreams will not come true. When all of your hopes and dreams do not come true, people who believe the Cinderella myth, they think something. Do you know what they think? They think I married the wrong person. No, that's not what that means. If all of your hopes and dreams do not come true, do you know what that means? It means you got married. That's all that means. You got married, because Marriage, that's just life in a broken world, isn't it? If you can't embrace this, you are not going to be a happy, healthy person. And you know people who are married, who have tons of money, who are happy, and who are broke and are happy. You know people who have tons of money who are married who are miserable, and who are broke who are miserable. Whatever your hopes and dreams are, if they do not come true, that should not impact your happiness. And that should not impact the health of the relationship. That's just life. We can deal with that. But there is something that will impact the health of your marriage, and that's this. When you put I before we. When you put I before we in your marriage, this leads to a new dynamic. Let's look at this slide. Expectations and demands create the environment for an unhappy marriage. Something happens where some of our hopes and desires become expectations. Before we were just engaged and I hoped and I desired, but now that we're married, you're supposed to. That's what husbands are supposed to do. That's what wives are supposed to do. I expect you to provide for the family. I expect you to be home at a certain time. I expect you to play with the kids. I expect you to do the laundry. I expect you to pay the bills. I expect you to move up in your career. I expect. As soon as our hopes and dreams become expectations and demands, a corrosive element is introduced into the relationship that undermines your ability to have a healthy relationship, because expectations put I before we. And in a healthy marriage, you can never put I before we except after C, because I cannot be the center of a healthy marriage. No one can be the center of a healthy marriage. But when someone introduces this dynamic, when you introduce expectations into the relationship, and they can be valid expectations, they can be good things. I've met very few people who want unhealthy or unreasonable expectations. Be home on time, take care of yourself, help raise the kids. They're good things that turn into expectations. But once expectations are introduced into the relationship dynamic, there are basically 6 ways to respond. And I call these the killer C's. Once expectations are brought into the relationship, there are 6 possible ways to respond. All of them are detrimental to the relationship. So in your notes, here are the killer C's. And for this part, okay, this is the part of the message where there's no elbows and no cutting eyes. Just look up here and just take notes, okay? No. And by the way, don't talk about this later today, all right? Some of you are like, I am glad it is snowing outside because it is going to take a long time to get home because we have some things to talk about after this sermon, okay? You are not allowed to talk about the killer C's for the rest of the day, just so you know. Here they are. This is for you to think about you, not to think about your spouse. The first option, when expectations are introduced into the marriage, is to cast off, to leave. I'm out of here. Listen. This isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I hoped for. You're not meeting my expectations. I'm not meeting your expectations. We're both getting miserable. We're both getting frustrated. This isn't working out for either of us. So someone leaves. And they pick up all of their expectations that their spouse couldn't meet, and they go out looking for someone new to dump all those expectations on. For some of you, this is why your second marriage feels an awful lot like your first marriage, because you took all your expectations that your first spouse couldn't meet and you went and dumped them on your second spouse. But assuming the marriage stays together, there's 5 other killer C's. The first one is to convince. Convince. Honey, look at this. I know you think you're doing this the right way, but that's the wrong way. I know you like to do it this way, but that's actually not the right way to do it. I knew that your family did it this way growing up, but they're not actually doing it the right way. Let me show you why my way is the right way to do it. And someone spends a lot of energy trying to convince their spouse that their approach, their way, their expectations are the right expectations. And how much happier aren't we all going to be if you decide you're going to approach it my way? And then who doesn't want to be married to someone who doesn't want them to be their true self, but to compromise who they actually are to make the other person happy? That's a formula for Happiness, right? Maybe not. All right. If convincing doesn't work, then it's convict. Convict takes convincing, and it takes it to a new level. You're wrong for doing it this way. I know your family of origin did it. How'd that turn out for them? Don't you see how frustrating this is for me when you do it that way? So you try and convict them, maybe shame them or make them feel guilty. And if that doesn't work, then some people move to control. This is when someone in the relationship starts telling lies. This is when someone in the relationship starts manipulating the facts. This is when someone in the relationship starts hiding receipts. This is when we try to control the situation or to control your spouse to get your expectations met. And in more extreme cases, this is where couples suffer from emotional or physical abuse. Someone has expectations, and in order to get those expectations met, they will try to control the situation or their spouse for their expectations to be met. Fifth one is capitulate. Someone finally gives up. Fine, I'll just do it your way. Fine, I give up. I see you're too stubborn. You're not going to change. I'm fine. I quit. I'm just going to do it your way. And the person who wins loves this because finally their expectations are getting met without the resistance. And the person who capitulates likes it at first as well. And the reason why they like it at first is because the temperature in the relationship cools off. And it's not agitated and the person's not fire anymore. I just did it their way. Now, fine, we have peace at least. But what inevitably happens when someone capitulates, when they conform, they will lose respect for one another because you're no longer being who you really are. And the relationship dissolves. There's one more, killer C, and that is compromise. When expectations are introduced into the relationship, many couples, and this is perhaps the most common, will begin to compromise, to which we say, wait a minute, I thought compromise was a good thing. We each come in and we talk about what we want to happen, and we'll spend these holidays here and those holidays there, and we'll spend this money here and that money there, and here's your allowance, and here's my allowance, and here's how we approach kids, and here's how we approach career, and here's how we approach laundry, and here's how we approach dishes. And there we go. We compromised, and we got everything all worked out. Isn't that the goal? So now there's peace in the home. Here's what happens when we compromise. Compromise creates more expectations. All you've done when you've compromised is you've made it crystal clear what everyone's expectations are. You maybe even negotiated all the expectations, so now we've got more expectations on one another, and expectations is what launches the cycle of the killer C's. And more expectations, if you get enough of them, you get enough expectations, and you know what you have? A contract. There are some things that you bring to the table. There are some things that I bring to the table. And together, we are all bringing things to the table. And we are keeping an eye on one another to make sure you're doing your part. And you keep an eye on me to make sure I do my part. And here's what happens. Contracts create debts and debtors. Whenever a contract is introduced to a relationship, now you have debts and debtors. You have people who owe something. And this is absolutely destructive to a marriage. Think about it. Let's say you have some expectations for me. You say, Jason, I expect you to measure up to here. That's my expectation for you. If I make it up to here, well, congratulations, Jason. You got to 0. You got where you were supposed to be. But what if I don't measure up? What if I only get to here? Then what? Jason, we need to look at this gap that you've created because you're supposed to be here, but you're only here. Now we've got a problem. This is why your mortgage company doesn't love you. This is why your landlord doesn't love you. They might love what you give them, but they don't love you because you have a contract. And as long as you meet the terms of the contract, They'll be perfectly happy with you, but you're not going to get a long, perfume-laced, handwritten note from your banker saying, "Dear Jason, you mean the world to me," because you have a contract. But if you fail to meet your end of the contract, you'll get some individualized attention, won't you? This is why when you open up your cell phone to make a call, you are never filled with gratitude when there's a signal, are you? Why? Because there's a contract. Because there's a contract, you have expectations, and you expect them to deliver their part of the contract, a cell phone signal, and they expect you to deliver your part of the contract, a monthly payment. So as long as everybody does what they're supposed to do, there's peace, there's quiet, but it squeezes out the ability to have love in the relationship. Think about your marriage. Wives, let's say that you expect your husband to buy you flowers for Valentine's Day. And he buys you flowers for Valentine's Day. You can't receive that as love at that point. You can only say, "Good, you met your expectation. You did what you were supposed to do." But if he doesn't buy you flowers for Valentine's Day, now what do we have? A debt. You owed me those things, and you didn't give me those things. So if you're taking notes, here's a blank to fill in. In a contractual approach to marriage, love is squeezed out. Love cannot exist in an environment where there are expectations, because love is something that must be freely expressed and freely received. Expectations squeeze out the ability for love to be expressed and received. Now, this is why many people today are completely abandoning the institution of marriage. The statistics on marriage today in America compared to 15 years ago are stunning. It has been a stunning societal shift in our approach to marriage. The average age for marriage has increased. It's increased almost 5 years for the age of the first marriage compared to 50 years ago. And the number of married people in America, the percentage, keeps dropping every single decade as Americans are saying, "Why would we get married? Marriage only complicates the relationship. We don't need a piece of paper from the government to tell us that we love each other. We already know that. And besides, this was our parents' approach to marriage. And for some of you, this was the home you grew up in. Your parents had everything negotiated out, and there may have been peace, but there was not love. And when they had those anniversaries where they were supposed to kiss in front of the cameras, they didn't look like they were enjoying it, and you certainly didn't want to emulate their marriage. So people today say, why would we want to enter into marriage? So we have people living together long-term, abandoning the institution of marriage. But unfortunately, that's an overcorrection that leads into the other ditch. A long-term romantic relationship without marriage leads to a consumer-vendor relationship. Here's what I mean by that. You have a favorite grocery store. You have a favorite coffee shop. You have your favorite dentist. Can you say that? Favorite dentist? Can you say that? Anyway, you have a dentist you go to. You have your favorite stores. You are under no obligation to shop at your favorite store. You might go in, you might know the owner, you might say, "Hey, barista," and the barista says, "Hey, customer, can I make you the usual?" And you say, "Absolutely," and they know you, but you are under no obligation to continue shopping there. If someone offers better produce at a cheaper price, you are free to take your business elsewhere. That's why in a consumer-vendor relationship, the vendor keeps marketing. They have to keep attracting you. They have to keep pulling you in. That's why all the businesses you do business with, they want your email address. They want to keep marketing to you. In a consumer-vendor relationship, love isn't squeezed out. Something else is squeezed out. In a consumer-vendor relationship, intimacy is squeezed out. And the reason why intimacy is squeezed out is you have to always be a little bit in marketing mode. Because if your partner finds a better produce at a cheaper price, they're under no obligation to continue shopping with you. So you have to be somewhat put together. They can't see all of your baggage. They can't see you warts and all. You always have to have a little bit of makeup on. You always have to be a little bit put together. And intimacy, as a result, gets squeezed out of a consumer-vendor relationship. You see, at the very first recorded marriage in civilization, there was a groom named Adam, there was a bride named Eve, and we're told that they were naked with one another and felt no shame. Now, nakedness was not just referring to their physical state, although they were. It meant they were emotionally naked with each other. They were emotionally vulnerable. They were emotionally intimate. They were spiritually naked. They were spiritually vulnerable with one another. They were physically emotional and intimate and vulnerable with one another. Nothing to hide. No corners, no baggage, nothing swept under the rug from their past. And they felt no shame. Marriage was designed to be something where you can truly be everything that you are without feeling ashamed. So, what are we supposed to do with all this? Again, this is introduction. We're going to build on this next week. This is the platform. So for the balance of our time, I want to talk about what to do with the hopes and dreams that you have for marriage. And the short answer is keep them. That's great. Keep your hopes and dreams. What we want to do is keep them from becoming and turning into expectations and falling into any one of the killer C's in your relationship. And to do that, we're going to look at a few verses with the balance of our time to discover what God's intention is for marriage and what a marriage relationship actually looks like. So to do that, we're going to begin by looking at Genesis chapter 2. First marriage, again, Adam and Eve, and we're told for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become, check this out, one flesh. Two people coming together and becoming one flesh. Now, this is not merely talking about their sexual union with one another, although that's certainly part of it, but the sexual oneness is merely symbolic of the life oneness. They legally become one. They emotionally become one. They spiritually become one. They physically become one. The two become one. Now, later on in the Old Testament, the prophet Malachi talks about this a little more. In Malachi chapter 2, the people were wondering why God wasn't answering their prayers. Why does God seem so far away? Malachi tells them why. He says, "You flood the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and wail because he no longer pays attention to your offerings or accepts them with pleasure from your hands." You ask why? It is because the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith with her. Though she is your partner, the wife of your marriage, what? Covenant. Has not the Lord made them one? So what we see in the biblical concept of what marriage is that it is a covenant relationship where two people legally, emotionally, spiritually, physically become united as one in a covenant. Now, what's a covenant? Let's start with what you do understand. Marriage is not a contract, but a covenant. And in the next note, if you're taking notes, contracts say, I will if you will. That's what a contract is. I will if you will. I've got some things I'm bringing to the table. You've got some things you're bringing to the table. I will if you do. If you don't, I won't. But I will if you will. That's a contract. What's a covenant? Covenants say, I will. This is why when you make wedding vows, you do not stand before the judge or you do not stand before the clergy, and the clergy or the judge do not ask, will you take this woman to be your wife in sickness and in health as long as you both shall live? Well, I will if she will. Yeah. What do you say when you get married? I do. I will. Because it's a covenant. Regardless of how they're acting on a given day, regardless of how I'm feeling on a given day, regardless of the circumstances we're facing on a given day, a covenant says, I am all in. I am obligating myself to become one with you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, as long as we both shall live. I am abandoning my identity as an individual to enter a covenantal relationship with you. So what do we do if that's what marriage is to keep our expectations out of the relationship? Look at what we have in Ephesians chapter 5, our last verse today. This is the secret to keeping expectations out. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, this word submit, that was actually a term that was used in the military in that generation. You sacrifice and surrender your autonomy to help your company, to help your legion as one achieve its goals. That's how the word was used in that day and age. It was used in the military. The biblical authors take this idea that had military usage and they apply it to a covenant relationship. Take some of your desires, some of your hopes, and all of your expectations and realize I'm going to sacrifice for the sake of the covenant. So the covenant can become everything it was created to be. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In other words, the secret to a great marriage is to be in a submission competition. The secret to a great marriage is to race to the back of the line, to race to the bottom of the ladder, to say your deal before my deal, your wants before my wants, your needs before my needs. How can I serve you today? It's a submission competition because we are to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Not because you love them, but because you revere Jesus. And if you're new to Christianity, this is what it means to be a Christian. To know that Jesus put our needs before His. Put our wants before His. Put our desires before His. He gave His life on a cross to forgive our sins. He didn't have any sins, but He submitted to the will of the Father. He submitted to our need to forgive us and to give us a home and a future with Him and to enter a covenant relationship with us. So we are included with Him in the presence of God. To be a Christian means to trust in Christ, and when God looks at you, He sees you as if you were His own Son, Jesus. We are covenanted with Him. So take the one person on the planet you promise to love, take the one person on the planet you enter a covenant relationship with, and because you revere Christ for what He's done for you, submit to that one person. So this week, to get you warmed up for next time, you've got some homework to do. This is especially if you're married, you do this with your spouse. If you're not married, you can pick one or two other relationships to practice on because, again, this applies to all relationships. But you've got some homework for next week in order to get ready for the rest of the series. This week, start a submission competition. When it comes to chores, start a submission competition. When it comes to hobbies, start a submission competition. When it comes to your budget this month, start a submission competition. When it comes to who's driving the kids, start a submission competition. When it comes to who's getting the back rub tonight, start a submission competition. When it comes to folding the laundry, start a submission competition. Now, here's what some of you are thinking. Well, I'm not doing that. Listen, wouldn't you love to be married to a person who every morning woke up thinking, how can I start a submission competition today? Wouldn't you love to be married to a person who every morning woke up thinking, man, I need to find a better way to serve my spouse today. I need to find a better way to meet their needs today. I need to find a better way to make it all about them today. Wouldn't you love to be married to a person who woke up every single morning thinking, how can I start a submission competition today? Like, yeah, that's exactly who I wanted to be married to, but I'm stuck with him. I'm stuck with her. You go first. Race to the back of the line. Happy couples have learned that a happy relationship begins with a submission competition. I will sacrifice my wants and my desires and my needs to bring fulfillment to you. But when you get a couple that does this, when they are both in a submission competition, look out, because that's going to change everything, and that's where you're going to find a relationship where there's plenty of hopes and desires, but there are no expectations, because they are each trying to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Start working on this week. Don't talk about this on the way home. We're going to pick it up here next Sunday. Let me pray for you guys. Father, thank you that we have your wisdom when it comes to marriage, because it is hard. And Father, some of us this afternoon, we're going to need some times of personal confession, because there's a lot of strain and stress in our marriages right now. And if we're honest, we're to blame. We have contributed with our own sin to so much of the hurt that's going on in our relationships. So, Father, give us a spirit of humility as we look at your truth during this series. Give us a spirit of hope and optimism as we believe that you can guide us, because we know that you want us to have great marriages that honor you. You are cheering for us, Lord. So help us to follow you, to submit to you, and to be people who are humble, who can win submission competitions, because we revere Jesus, who submitted himself to us. Jesus, give us your strength this month. We ask it in your name. Amen.